We'll be back in a minute. Swan of a Broken Heart. We're on the road here in Spokane, Washington, as we continue our Community Voices, Community Media 70 City Tour. Tonight we'll be in Missoula, Montana. We'll be broadcasting from Missoula PBS tomorrow. We'll move on to Helena and then on to Bozeman tomorrow night, and the next day we'll be broadcasting from Bozeman. Then we're on to Boise, Idaho, and then to Los Angeles. Next week we'll be in Oklahoma, and we'll be in Madison, Wisconsin, and beyond. And we're looking for story ideas. If you've got ideas, go to stories@democracynow.org. Just send your email of story suggestions and people to contact at stories@democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Here in Spokane, we're broadcasting from the PBS station KSPS, run by the Spokane Public Schools. And we're talking about an institution, a company not 3 miles from here, operating out of the American Legion Hall in Spokane. Our guest here in studio is Karen Dorn-Steele, George Polk Award-winning journalist. She wrote for the Spokesman Review a series of pieces on Jessen Mitchell. In Washington, D.C., Mark Benjamin. In New York, in our Firehouse studio, we're joined by Catherine Eban of Vanity Fair. I wanted to ask about Dick Cheney's latest comments. Dick Cheney is demanding that the CIA release memos that show that these enhanced interrogation techniques were effective. He said, what we authorized wasn't torture, but it worked. We got actionable intelligence from these techniques. Catherine Eban, from your research, what did you find?
Well, from my research, I found exactly the opposite, that there had been an FBI, the issue is very active over the detainee Abu Zubaydah, and there had been an FBI interrogation team with him initially, which had basically nursed him back to health after gunshot wounds and used classic rapport building tactics, which is what the FBI excels at. And it was because of those tactics that he revealed that KSM, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, was the architect of 9/11, and also revealed the name of Jose Padilla, and that, in fact, he was talking to interrogators until Mitchell showed up, along with the CIA interrogation team, began imposing these harsh tactics, and Zubaydah clammed up. So in response to that, they made a request to accelerate these tactics. I think they refer to it in the memos that were just released as an intense pressure phase. Basically what my sources say is, sure, these tactics, these coercive tactics can get you to talk, but about what? So how do you verify the legitimacy of the information? Well, apparently under torture, Zubaydah gave investigators a lot of false leads, which ate up the time of American intelligence back at home. So, the debate is a very live one. There are people in the CIA who say these tactics absolutely worked, and I do think that this is going to be a central question of investigations as they go forward, is the effectiveness of these tactics, and people are now...
I thought it was very interesting, Catherine Eban, how you described what happened. The FBI they're getting intelligence that they think is actually useful. George Tenet, then Director of Central Intelligence, hears about this. He's very proud that intelligence is coming out from the interrogation. And then he's informed it's not coming from CIA interrogators, it's coming from FBI interrogators. And he hits the roof. And that's when they send in Jessen and the other CIA interrogators. You could take it from there.
Right. And let me just say that they sent in Mitchell. I don't believe that Jessen was there at that point. But it was interesting
Mitchell.
that Mitchell Jessen, Mitchell's company at that point closed up shop about a day before, the day after Zubaydah was captured. And then he was deployed to Thailand, to this safe house where they were interrogating Zubaydah. But what you had in this situation was a classic turf war. you had the CIA wanting to take the credit for getting actionable intelligence. As soon as they started using these coercive tactics, it had a rather profound effect, which is that the FBI felt compelled to withdraw their investigators from the scene. The effect of that, the end result, is that the CIA had total control over these interrogations. So by using these coercive tactics, they also won a turf war.
Mark Benjamin, as you look at these torture memos right now, and the whole cachet around Mitchell Jessen, if you can call it that, around getting effective intelligence, when, as Catherine Eben was saying, it was the opposite.
Well, that's right. And when you look at the memos, there are even some hints there that show what interrogators have long believed, which is that these are not effective ways to gather intelligence. What Mitchell and Jessen were doing is just not an effective way of running an intelligence operation. And I would just add, my reporting suggests that when the CIA put together this interrogation program, this torture program, they didn't involve any experienced interrogators. There were no interrogators involved. Nobody who knows how to effectively question a suspect set this thing up. The CIA didn't have anybody on board that knew how to do this stuff. I mean, it was people who just, frankly, didn't know what they were doing. I mean, they knew how to train soldiers how to resist torture, but not how to get effective intelligence. And in fact, if you look at the memos that came out last week, there's a reference in one of the memos to a CIA Inspector General report. And according to the reference, the CIA Inspector General criticized the CIA's own interrogation program, saying essentially they didn't know when somebody was being recalcitrant and wouldn't talk, and when they just didn't know anything. That's the problem with torture, and so they ended up torturing people even though they'd already said everything they know. I mean, it was just, that's the problem with torture. You don't know, I mean, how do you know when to torture somebody and when not to? How do you know when they're telling you the truth and when they're not? It's just, and I think the memos, while they're meant to back up and say that this torture program is defensible, I think if you look at them pretty closely, that facade starts to fall apart pretty fast.
Karen Dornsteele.
Yes, we interviewed two former SEER instructors here in Spokane, one person who's now a lawyer, another who's a psychologist. And the psychologist, Mark Mays, told us that the most important function of the psychologist in the legitimate SEER program is to make sure that the interrogators aren't going out of bounds, because when they do, you get bad information.
Mark Benjamin, we were both covering in 2007 the APA National Convention that was taking place in San Francisco. At that time, the dissident psychologists who wanted the APA to impose a ban on members participating in coercive interrogations lost. They ultimately found this loophole in the bylaws and found that they could put out the referendum to the membership instead of keep getting it voted down by the leadership. But what about the APA and and Mitchell Jessen?
Well, as we mentioned, Mitchell and Jessen were not members of the APA, but I think the sort of, Reader's Digest version is that I think it's safe to say that the psychologists have been traditionally very, very close to the military. They've been working with the military and the CIA for years. And are closer than, say, psychiatrists and other doctors. I think it's fair to say that the APA, the psychologists, as opposed to psychiatrists and doctors, have been much more willing since September 11th to play ball, essentially, to not remove themselves from interrogations as doctors and psychiatrists did, to continue to participate. And I think that's reflected in the way Mitchell and Jessen, were so important here. I think the psychologists saw a way to be players at the table, and that was reflected in their association and the APA. And the APA essentially allowed their, wrote rules year after year after year, that would allow the continued participation of psychologists in these brutal interrogations. And now that these memos have come out, I think it's really clear how important the government saw those psychologists were in having them in the room or watching on video or designing the program or carrying it out.